In the sprawling shadow of Xerxes' I's massive Persian army, 480 BCE, stood a seemingly insignificant Greek city-state called Athens. As the Persian king surveyed his forces, reportedly numbering over 100,000 men, he could not have imagined that this small polity, with its limited territory and modest population, would not only survive his onslaught but would flourish long after his empire crumbled into dust. How do small nations survive, and sometimes thrive, while empires collapse around them? This question has puzzled historians for centuries, yet the answer contains insights crucial for understanding power dynamics throughout human civilization. The Persian Empire under Darius I and later Xerxes I stretched from the Indus River to the Mediterranean, encompassing approximately 44% of the world's population at its height. By contrast, Athens possessed merely a fraction of these resources. Yet within 50 years of repelling the Persian invasion, Athens entered its golden age, producing philosophical, artistic, and political innovations that would influence human thought for millennia, while the Persian Empire began a slow decline that would end with Alexander's conquests in 330 BCE. This pattern has repeated throughout history: vast, seemingly invincible empires falter and fade, while smaller, more adaptable nations endure. The Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries, yet tiny Venice outlasted it, surviving from 697 CE until 1797 CE, over a millennium. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, fractured within 2 generations of Genghis Khan's death, while small kingdoms like Portugal, established 1139 CE, continued. The survival strategies of these smaller nations provide a fascinating study in adaptability, innovation, and strategic thinking, qualities as relevant in today's geopolitical landscape as they were thousands of years ago. When the mighty Ottoman Empire was expanding across the Mediterranean in the 16th century, threatening to dominate European politics, commerce, and religion, few would have bet on the survival of a diminutive republic perched on coastal lagoons. Yet the Republic of Venice not only survived but thrived through a combination of diplomatic agility, commercial innovation, and strategic governance that larger powers could not match. Zoltan Venia, a Venetian diplomat serving the Republic in 1571, wrote in his journals, "Our council recognizes what the Sultan does not, that strength lies not in the size of territory but in the capacity to adapt." This philosophy guided Venice through centuries of tumultuous Mediterranean politics. While the Ottoman Empire relied primarily on military might, maintaining massive armies that strained imperial resources, Venice developed sophisticated systems of governance, intelligence gathering, and commercial enterprise. The Venetian Great Council, comprised of noble families, created one of history's most effective oligarchic systems. Their election of a doge, chief magistrate, involved a complex procedure designed to prevent any single family from dominating, a system that maintained remarkable political stability while massive empires around them suffered from succession crises and internal revolts. On May 7, 1573, when the Ottoman Empire signed the peace treaty ending the Fourth Ottoman-Venetian War, Sultan Selim II commanded territories stretching from Algeria to the Persian Gulf. Yet it was Venice, with its mere 200,000 citizens, that dictated many of the terms. How? The answer lies partly in what historians now recognize as strategic adaptation. Venice had transformed itself from a fishing village into the Mediterranean's commercial powerhouse by developing specialized economic niches, particularly in luxury trade, shipping, and banking. While the Ottoman Empire focused on territorial conquest, Venice created the Commenda, a revolutionary business arrangement that shared investment risk and profit, effectively creating one of history's first joint stock companies. By 1423, Venice had established Europe's first public bank, the Banco Giro, which stabilized currency exchange and provided capital for commercial ventures. This financial innovation generated wealth that allowed the small republic to hire mercenary armies, build an impressive navy, and engage in diplomatic maneuvers that frustrated the ambitions of much larger powers. The strategic insight that Zoltan Venia and other Venetian leaders understood was that empires face inherent disadvantages. The larger they grow, the more resources they must devote to maintaining control over distant territories and diverse populations. This imperial overstretch, a term coined by modern historian Paul Kennedy, eventually undermines even the most formidable empires. Similar patterns emerge when examining Switzerland, a small confederation that has maintained independence since 1291 CE despite being surrounded by European powers constantly at war. During the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, as the Habsburg Empire, France, Sweden, and various German states devastated Central Europe, Switzerland remained neutral and prosperous. The Swiss developed a defensive military system based on citizen militias and the challenging mountain terrain. Rather than competing with imperial powers for territory, they specialized in banking, precision manufacturing, and mercenary services, creating economic niches that made them valuable to all sides. Their decentralized cantonal system of governance allowed for local autonomy while maintaining sufficient unity for defense. When Maria Stinson, an English traveler, visited Switzerland in 1643, she observed, while the great kingdoms exhaust themselves in endless wars, these mountain people grow wealthy by serving all and conquering none. Her observation captures the essential strategy: smaller nations often prosper by focusing on specialized services rather than territorial conquest. Perhaps the most dramatic example of a small nation outlasting empires comes from Ethiopia, which maintained independence throughout the 19th century, a scramble for Africa when European powers colonized almost the entire continent. When Italian forces invaded Ethiopia in 1896, Emperor Menelik II commanded a force that decisively defeated them at the Battle of Adwa on March 1, the first major victory of an African nation over a European colonial power. Ethiopia succeeded where larger African kingdoms failed because Menelik II had modernized his military while maintaining traditional social structures that ensured loyalty. He purchased modern weapons from France and Russia, playing imperial powers against each other. Most importantly, he united diverse ethnic groups under a national identity that transcended tribal affiliations, creating internal cohesion that many empires lacked. The pattern continues in modern times. During the Cold War, Finland, sharing a 1,340-kilometer border with the Soviet Union, maintained independence through a careful policy of neutrality and economic specialization. Finnish President Urho Kekkonen implemented what became known as Finlandization, a pragmatic policy of neutrality that recognized Soviet security interests while preserving Finnish sovereignty and democracy. Meanwhile, the massive Soviet Empire, despite its vast resources and military might, collapsed in 1991 due to economic inefficiency, ethnic tensions, and administrative rigidity. What do these historical examples tell us about the dynamics of power and survival? Several key patterns emerge. First, smaller nations often develop specialized economic niches rather than competing directly with empires. Venice dominated glass production and banking, Switzerland excelled in watchmaking and financial services, modern Singapore has become a financial hub and shipping center. This specialization creates value that makes them useful partners rather than tempting conquests. Second, governance innovations often provide advantages. While empires typically develop bureaucracies focused on extracting resources from provinces, smaller nations frequently create more responsive governments. The Venetian Great Council, Swiss cantonal system, and the modern Estonian digital government all demonstrate how governance innovation can create resilience. Third, diplomatic agility consistently proves crucial. Small nations rarely have the luxury of ideological rigidity. Instead, they practice pragmatic diplomacy, forming alliances when necessary and maintaining neutrality when advantageous. The Republic of Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, survived from 1358 to 1808 by maintaining relationships with both Ottoman and Habsburg empires, paying tribute when necessary while preserving internal autonomy. Fourth, cultural cohesion often gives small nations an advantage over diverse empires. While multicultural empires must devote resources to maintaining control over populations with different languages, religions, and customs, smaller nations frequently benefit from stronger shared identity and purpose. This cultural cohesion allows them to mobilize resources more effectively in times of crisis. When the Portuguese Empire, the first global colonial empire, began establishing trading posts across Africa, Asia, and South America in the 15th century, few would have predicted that a collection of 7 provinces in northwestern Europe would eventually create a more lasting impact on global commerce. Yet the Dutch Republic, 1581 to 1795, developed commercial and financial innovations that transformed global trade while the Portuguese Empire gradually lost influence. On April 22, 1619, Jan Pietersoen Cohen, Governor-General of the Dutch East India Company, established a trading post at Batavia, modern Jakarta. Unlike the Portuguese system of direct crown control, the Dutch created the world's first multinational corporation, the VOC, which raised capital through shares sold to the public. This innovation allowed the small republic to pool resources for expensive overseas ventures while spreading risk among investors. The Amsterdam Exchange Bank, established in 1609, further revolutionized international finance by creating a stable currency system that facilitated global trade. While larger empires relied primarily on precious metals seized from colonies, the Dutch created paper-based financial instruments that multiplied available capital through sophisticated credit mechanisms. These financial and commercial innovations enabled a nation of fewer than 2 million people to develop a global trading network that rivaled those of much larger empires. The Dutch succeeded not through territorial conquest but by creating systems that added value to international trade, establishing specialized shipping services, insurance markets, and commercial law that benefited merchants throughout Europe. The adaptive capacity of smaller nations often manifests in technological innovation as well. When surrounded by larger powers with superior military forces, small nations frequently develop asymmetric advantages through technology. Ancient Greek city-states created the phalanx formation and trireme warships that neutralized Persian numerical advantages. In the 20th century, Israel developed sophisticated defense systems and intelligence capabilities that offset the larger armies of neighboring states. This pattern extends beyond military technology. Estonia, after regaining independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, transformed itself into one of the world's most digitally advanced societies. By implementing e-governance, digital identity systems, and online voting, Estonia created governmental efficiency that many larger nations still struggle to achieve. This digital transformation has enhanced Estonia's security, economy, and global influence despite its population of just 1.3 million. The lessons from these historical examples have profound implications for modern organizations, nations, and individuals. In today's rapidly changing global environment, the advantages once held by scale and resources are increasingly offset by the benefits of adaptability and specialization. Modern corporations might note that market dominance does not ensure longevity. Just as the British East India Company once controlled vast territories before collapsing, today's corporate giants face similar risks of overextension and rigidity. The companies that survive longest tend to be those that maintain the adaptive capacity and specialized focus characteristic of successful small nations. For contemporary nation-states, the historical pattern suggests that military and territorial expansion often leads to diminishing returns. The United States and China, as they compete for global influence, might learn from historical empires that overextended themselves. The most enduring influence often comes not from territorial control but from creating systems, values, and innovations that others voluntarily adopt. For individuals navigating careers in a changing economy, the strategies of successful small nations offer valuable insights. Specialization in areas where larger competitors cannot easily dominate, cultivation of adaptive capacity, and development of valuable networks often prove more durable than attempting to compete directly with entrenched powers. When the Arab conquest swept across North Africa and the Middle East in the 7th century CE, bringing vast territories under the Umayyad Caliphate, the small Byzantine city of Constantinople seemed likely to fall. Yet through a combination of technological innovation, diplomatic maneuvering, and strategic adaptation, the Byzantine Empire not only survived but would continue for nearly 8 more centuries while the Umayyad Caliphate fragmented within 100 years. The Byzantine defense relied partly on Greek fire, an incendiary weapon that could burn on water, devastating Arab naval forces during the siege of Constantinople in 674 to 678 CE. This technological advantage, combined with the massive Theodosian walls and sophisticated diplomatic arrangements with neighboring peoples like the Bulgars, allowed the smaller Byzantine state to survive against overwhelming odds. Perhaps the most significant Byzantine innovation was administrative rather than military. The theme system, implemented fully by Emperor Constantine v. 741 to 775 CE, reorganized provinces to better integrate civil and military authority while adapting to reduced territorial holdings. This administrative flexibility allowed the empire to maximize limited resources in ways that larger, more rigid empires could not match. The Byzantine example highlights another crucial advantage smaller nations often possess: institutional memory and continuity. While rapid expansion often brings diverse administrative systems under imperial control, creating inefficiencies, smaller nations frequently maintain institutional knowledge and practices over longer periods. The Byzantine civil service, legal system, and diplomatic corps preserved Roman administrative traditions that provided stability through centuries of external threats. This pattern of institutional continuity creating resilience appears repeatedly. The Republic of San Marino, founded in 301 CE and still independent today, maintains the world's oldest constitutional documents, dating to 1600, and a governmental system that has evolved gradually rather than through revolutionary upheaval. This institutional stability has helped San Marino navigate the rise and fall of surrounding Italian states for over 1,700 years. When examining how small nations survive alongside empires, the role of geography cannot be overlooked. Venice's lagoon setting, Switzerland's alpine terrain, and Britain's island position all provided natural defenses that compensated for smaller populations. However, geography alone does not explain longevity. Many well-situated nations have fallen while others in vulnerable locations have endured. The critical factor often proves to be how effectively nations leverage their geographic position through strategic thinking. Singapore, gaining independence in 1965 with no natural resources and surrounded by larger neighbors, transformed its seemingly vulnerable location at the Strait of Malacca into its greatest asset by developing port facilities that became essential to regional trade. When Lee Kuan Yew became Singapore's first prime minister, he recognized that survival required creating value that would make the city-state indispensable to larger powers. "We had to create a new kind of economy," he later wrote, "build something that would distinguish us from our neighbors." This strategic insight, that smaller nations must develop specialized functions valuable to the international system, has proven decisive throughout history. The most successful small nations have typically excelled at turning apparent weaknesses into strengths. Lacking natural resources, Japan developed advanced manufacturing. Possessing limited agricultural land, the Netherlands pioneered efficient farming techniques. Without large populations, Nordic countries invested heavily in education to maximize human capital. This adaptive capacity, the ability to transform constraints into advantages, represents perhaps the most significant factor in the longevity of smaller nations. While empires often double down on existing strategies that brought past success, smaller nations have repeatedly demonstrated willingness to fundamentally reinvent themselves when circumstances demand. Iceland provides a compelling modern example. When the 2008 financial crisis devastated its banking sector, this island nation of just 330,000 people implemented dramatic reforms, letting banks fail, prosecuting financial crimes, and restructuring its economy towards sustainable industries like renewable energy and tourism. This rapid adaptation allowed Iceland to recover more quickly than many larger economies that attempted to preserve existing financial structures. The historical record suggests that the ultimate advantage of smaller nations may be found in necessity itself. Without the resource buffer that larger states possess, small nations must develop greater sensitivity to changing conditions and more flexible responses. This heightened adaptive pressure often produces innovations that eventually influence larger systems. When the massive Spanish Empire dominated global trade and colonization in the 16th century, few would have predicted that the Dutch Republic, fighting for its very existence against Spanish rule, would pioneer commercial and financial practices that would ultimately shape the modern global economy more profoundly than Spanish colonial extraction. As our world faces unprecedented challenges, from climate change to technological disruption, the historical resilience of small nations offers valuable lessons. The capacity to adapt quickly, specialize effectively, form strategic alliances, and transform constraints into advantages may prove more valuable than raw size and power in navigating an uncertain future. The story of small nations outlasting empires reminds us that history does not always favor the apparently strong. From ancient Athens developing democracy while Persian satrapy stagnated, to modern Estonia pioneering e-governance while larger nations struggle with digital transformation, smaller entities have repeatedly demonstrated that adaptability, innovation, and strategic focus often prove more durable than sheer size and military might. As Zoltan Venier observed in his 16th-century diplomatic correspondence, the great empires see only their strength today. We must see clearly both today and tomorrow. This forward-looking adaptive capacity has allowed small nations to navigate the rise and fall of empires across millennia, and continues to shape our world today.